Vertigo is a psychological thriller film released by Paramount Pictures on May 9th, 1958. Based on the novel D'entre les Morts by Boileau and Narcejac, it was adapted to the screen by Alec Copel and Samuel Taylor. It was directed by Alfred Hitchcock, and it stars the likes of James Stewart, Kim Novak, Barbara Bel Geddes, and Tom Helmore. Being released in the 50s, Vertigo was part of a string of releases such as Rear Window, To Catch a Thief, and Dial M for Murder that marked Hitchcock's return to mainstream relevance. Many regard Vertigo as one of Hitchcock's finest works, with the film going so far as to dethrone Citizen Kane as the greatest film of all time, according to the British Film Institute. It's probably safe to say that everybody and their grandma knows who Hitchcock is. Even if you haven't seen a single one of his movies, you've likely heard his name being tossed around as a metric to compare the talent and ability of directors from past, present, and future, with many believing him to be far and away the undisputed greatest to have ever lived. With that being said, one of the greatest films ever made by one of the greatest directors who's ever lived, only naturally translates into the ride of a lifetime. Right? In this review, we're going to strap on our blinders and take a peek at another movie on a long list of greats that you've likely never seen, and try to figure out for ourselves what the fuss is about. Just as a warning to those of you who haven't seen this movie, there will be major spoilers ahead. If you still want to see the movie for yourself, please click off the video now. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The movie begins with San Francisco police detective John Scotty Ferguson chasing a criminal across some rooftops. During the chase, Scotty fails to make the jump from one rooftop to another, leaving him holding on to the edge for life. The policeman with him, in an attempt to pull him up, ends up falling off the roof to his death. All the while, Scotty is left paralyzed in fear, discovering while hanging on for dear life that he has acrophobia. Sometime after these events, Scotty, who quit the force in the wake of his incident, is contacted by an old friend, Gavin Ellister, who hopes to hire Scotty as a private eye to spy on his wife, Madeline. He asks Scotty to do this on the premise that his wife has not been herself lately, and that she has literally been acting like another person for lengthy periods of time, with no memory of what happens during those blackouts. Scotty agrees to assist Ellister and begins following her. Scotty's investigation leads him to uncover that Madeline, during her blackouts, takes on the persona of Carlotta Valdez, Madeline's great-grandmother who went mad and took her own life after her child was taken away from her. One day, during one of Madeline's blackouts, Scotty follows her to a lookout point by the Golden Gate Bridge, only to watch her jump into the bay below. Scotty jumps in and rescues her, and after bringing her back to his place to recover, he talks to Gavin, who reveals that Carlotta took her life at the age of 26, the same age Madeline is now. It is at this point Scotty takes a more direct role in the investigation, staying at Madeline's side and personally watching over her, which inadvertently leads to him falling in love with her. This culminates in the two of them ending up at a church from one of Madeline's visions, which causes Madeline to run up the stairs to the top of the church tower. Scotty gives chase, but his vertigo causes him to panic partway up the stairs, leaving him helpless to watch as Madeline plummets from the top of the tower. Though Scotty is cleared of any legal fault, he feels responsible for Madeline's death, and begins to have night terrors where he is haunted by the spirit of Carlotta. While wandering the streets of San Francisco, he runs into a woman that is a mirror image of Madeline. He follows her back to her apartment, where he begs her to tell him who she is, leading him to awkwardly ask her out to dinner. This woman, Judy, though seemingly reluctant to abide the wishes of a complete stranger, agrees to meet him. It is while she is getting ready for dinner that she sits down and begins to write a letter that she ends up destroying. A letter to Scotty, revealing that she had been pretending to be Madeline all along. a letter revealing that she had been hired by Gavin to impersonate his wife as a means of murdering her and staging it to look like a suicide. A letter revealing that Judy, while impersonating Madeline, had fallen in love with Scotty. Scotty and Judy end up in a relationship after this, where Scotty becomes obsessively controlling of Judy in an effort to recreate Madeleine's appearance, and where Judy cannot bring herself to leave in hopes that she can make Scotty fall in love with who she really is. This culminates in Scotty bringing her back to the tower where Madeleine died, forcing Judy to climb the stairs so that he may save her. Once at the top of the tower, Scotty reveals that he knows the truth, having seen Judy wearing the necklace that had supposedly belonged to Carlotta. Judy confesses that she truly loved Scotty, pleading with him to stay with her. It is then that she sees a dark figure emerging from the stairwell. This causes her to panic, leading her to back off the edge of the tower, sending her plummeting to her death. The dark figure is revealed to be a nun, who proceeds to ring the tower bell as Scotty looks on helplessly at the scene below. So first order of business, it should be said that this is a very visual movie. The opening credits starts with a close-up of a woman's face, which goes from a dull shade of gray to a bright red when the title card appears. What follows is what can only be described as a series of psychedelic images that work to hypnotize the viewers where they sit. We see something similar during Scotty's night terror sequence, where he is assaulted by a myriad of colors and images that culminate into a free fall to the roof where Madeleine died. These particular scenes hypnotize the viewer and allow them to experience firsthand the uncomfortable dizziness that you could potentially associate with a condition such as vertigo. The musical score for this movie is completely enveloping, effortlessly translating the lingering feeling of foreboding, and in some cases dread, that we see unraveling on screen and amplifying them in a way that makes the audience viciously uncomfortable, but at the same time unable to look away for fear of missing out. An interesting camera trick this movie uses quite frequently is the transition between the first-person view of Scotty and the third-person view of Scotty's face. These transitions are effective in not only establishing the important elements of each scene, but also giving us an emotional anchor to the main character. We not only get to see what he sees as he sees it, but we also get to see the emotions running across his face, giving us important visual confirmation of the significance of the events playing out. Another thing to note is that during some sequences, the camera tends to linger in certain shots, such as the scene where Scotty is using a stepping stool to test his fear of heights. These particular shots tend to ratchet up the tension of every scene even further. Another major visual the movie implements are in the shots where Scotty is experiencing an episode of acrophobia. The camera flies away from a fixed point while simultaneously zooming in on that point, completely distorting the viewer's perception of that particular shot. This is something you've likely seen used in major scenes of movies like Jaws or the first Lord of the Rings movie. Well, this trick is referred to as the dolly zoom, and apparently, this is the first movie to ever make use of that trick. It's quite effective, too. Even if you aren't particularly afraid of heights, the use of these shots, coupled with the aforementioned perspective shifts and musical score, do a fantastic job of translating just how disorienting and terrifying the sensation of vertigo can be, especially for someone in the position of Scotty. For a movie from the 50s, the technical work is absolutely top-notch, and for that, the movie gets a tip of the cap. So what about the story? Where does it stack up in the midst of all these camera tricks, musical scores, and eye-catching visuals and landscape shots? Well, one thing I will say is that the acting is damn good. None of the visuals would have translated effectively if the emotions portrayed weren't up to snuff. But fortunately, every actor plays their part well, and every experience they have is shown to be very important to them, and as such, it works as a means of making it feel important to us. With that being said, though, the story isn't always able to keep up. Scenes such as the opening of the movie, the chase up the church tower, and the dream sequence are all dripping with emotional tension and will easily keep an audience glued to their seats. The progression of the story unfolds in a way that makes sense, with every new piece of information adding a layer of intrigue that keeps the audience wanting to know what's next. However, you also need a great deal of patience. The events of the movie unfold very slowly, almost too slowly in some places. The movie's a bit of a love letter to San Francisco, name-dropping locations and lingering on certain shots for as long as they can get away with it. This is really apparent in the driving sequences where the car is seen going up and down the rolling cobblestone hills and tracking its progression through the streets. While the movie's able to use this to build tension, it also gets old rather fast, especially considering the first act of the movie is almost entirely dominated by driving and walking. The worst offender for dragging out the story, though, is the character of Midge. Midge is a friend of Scotty's who periodically shows up to try and help him out. I would have included Midge in the plot summary above if she had contributed anything meaningful to the story. She assists Scotty in getting some information on Carlotta, is there for him after Madeleine's death, and is also in love with him. But all of these story beats end up going nowhere, both for her character and the story overall. She just sort of comes and goes at random, and you could honestly cut out almost all of her scenes with it having no bearing on the story overall. It's kind of a shame, too, because she has a very upbeat and charming personality that stands out from the rather dour tone of the rest of the movie. The most shocking revelation of the movie comes when we find out what had initially seemed a paranormal investigation of a troubled woman had actually been a ruse to stage that woman's murder and allow her husband to leave the country with her assets. While this revelation is completely out of left field in the context of what we'd seen earlier, it still makes sense. And realistically, the movie should have ended there, leaving us to wonder if the truth would ever come to light and if the characters would ever be able to live with what had happened. But, as mentioned before, the movie takes its time, and sometimes not in a good way. We end up getting another 20 minutes of movie leading up to Judy's fall from the church tower, where we are subjected to the quote-unquote relationship between her and Scotty, which simply consists of him being borderline abusive. The ending proper also leaves something to be desired, as the screen just cuts to black as we watch Scotty gaze over the edge of the church tower where Judy fell. There's no payoff for the story to end this way. The cut to black insinuates that there are questions that have yet to be answered, but at the same time, there's really nowhere for the story to go. Judy's dead, Gavin has fled the country, Scotty may or may not be cured of his vertigo, and Midge is just frankly gone. In short, this is a good movie. Aspects such as the musical score, the camera work, the visual tricks, and the acting all carry this movie high above movies that would try to compete with it. The dialogue is solid, and the story keeps you wondering where it's going to go with every new piece of information, though at times it can get in its own way. As far as minor gripes go, the love story between Scotty and the Madeleine persona is a bit forced, feeling like it's happening more out of necessity as opposed to something blossoming out of legitimate chemistry. Also, for a movie called Vertigo, it doesn't really explore the implications of Scotty's acrophobia as much as it could have. You obviously don't want to cram it into every single scene, but perhaps having a few extra throwaway comments about ground-level bars or a couple of scenes with nervous glances down a staircase or two would have helped to flesh out the debilitating effects of the condition a little better, as well as helping to establish how it would be significant to the story itself. The final rating for what some would call one of the greatest movies ever made is 7.5 out of 10. This is an enjoyable thriller that is well put together, and it's definitely worth the watch. But don't expect to be on the edge of your seat for the entire runtime, or for your world to be shattered by the time the screen goes to black. With that being said, thanks for stopping by. If you enjoyed listening to all that uneducated rambling, consider sticking around. Maybe leaving a like and subscribing if you choose. And if you have any recommendations for reviews you want to see in the future, be sure to drop them down in the comments. There's plenty more to come, so if you care about that, I'll see you when I see you.